got a 2007 BMW X3 with the 3.0 6-cylinder engine, and the customer was actually complaining about it stalling and kind of running rough, and also if at idle, letting it run, it'll start to make a like a squeal noise. So just being familiar with the platform, this is an N52 engine, and common problems are, as far as the squealing noise, which I would like to take a look at first, would be the crankcase ventilation system. If it fails, it'll create a squealing noise from the basically vacuum leak. So, but first things first, I will scan the DME and try to see what kind of codes there are, especially looking for lean codes or mixture codes, something to that extent, if my gut feeling is correct about the crankcase ventilation system fault. As far as the stalling, yes, the stalling can be a result of the bad running if there is a crankcase breathing issue, but we will look further into that and see if it's related or a separate issue. I did end up scanning the vehicle, and as far as the trouble codes that I am concerned with, as far as in the DME, this top one here for crankshaft sensor signal, and then there is the mixture code, and then there are two other ones. I'm not concerned with this one here, but the crankshaft sensor synchronization, a little bit concerned with, but I am going to mainly pay attention to these two first and make sure that we do have a crankcase vacuum leak due to the noise the engine was making. And then I want to see if the crankshaft sensor signal is dropping out. That one there can explain also the stalling issue that the customer is complaining about. So based on these two codes right there, I am wondering if we actually do have two separate issues at hand. As far as my testing areas and what I'm going to look at, I am set up at the DME, and as far as the crankcase, I will be testing here with this adapter that I basically made off of another oil cap, and I will be running the engine, checking the crankcase pressures to see if it's out of spec. As far as the spec, I actually do have a list here provided by BMW, and based on your engine, it gives you a spec that they want the engine to be at as far as the crankcase pressures. And in this one, we are dealing with the N52, and as far as the spec, somewhere between 0.89 to 0.9. As far as out here in atmosphere, that is the starting point. So get that set up to measure the crankcase pressures, and then I am tapped into the both cam sensors and the crank sensor. As far as why I'm doing that, I want to measure all three at the same time while monitoring if the crank sensor drops out, to also check the cam crank correlations with a known good waveform for an N52, which I do have. So the scope is running. As far as the channel setup, the blue on the bottom is going to be the crankshaft, the red is going to be intake cam, green is going to be exhaust cam. So now we're all set up. We'll go ahead and crank it. Now this is a cold start. It's been sitting overnight, and so I'll crank it and let it idle and see if we can capture anything. There's the sensor signals. And that means that the vacuum sensor is pegged out. There's way too much vacuum in there. I'll show you. So, as you can hear, there's just way too much vacuum. You see? So what I'm doing is I'm trying to just see the okay, and now you can hear the whining. Listen for it as I release this. It goes away. If I cap off, it comes back. So that most likely what it's come to be known is that's the rear main seal screaming, because it's basically sucking itself in. And it's the air passing through from atmosphere into the crankcase through the seal, and it makes that whistling noise. And obviously we're gonna run rough. And we're also still monitoring the sensor signals. We haven't had any dropouts yet. And there, it's stalled out. Good, we got it on camera. And we'll try to start it right away, see what it does. All right. Extended crank. And all right, let me shut this off. Alright, so we do have two separate issues. We'll go back to the first engine stall, which is here. Now you can see the blue, the crankshaft sensor signal on the bottom basically drops out and the vehicle stalls. Probably at this point, because without the crank sensor the cams were still going, but the computer couldn't basically find where the crankshaft position was, so it stalls the vehicle. And then we go over, this is where we sat with the key on, and this is when we started cranking. How do we know? Is because the only way to get a signal here is to spin the motor and get the cams to spin and generate a signal. So both cams are spinning there, and they have to be spinning by the timing chain, which is tied to the crankshaft. So this whole time, at least even in the cranking point, the crankshaft was spinning, but because there's no sensor signal from the crankshaft sensor, that extended cranking time is the DME trying to find itself, and now it switches over to watching the cam sensors to try to identify to send spark at a certain point to get the engine running. That's the point where it runs, where it finally runs, and then at some point the crankshaft sensor signal comes back. That would coincide with the crankshaft sensor signal code. And just to verify, I will check the timing with a known good as far as trying to decipher the synchronization code that the DME had. Okay, so this is a known good that I captured a while ago. It's for an N52 as well, and the channels are actually set up the same way. So the crank's down in blue, red is intake, green is exhaust. And right off the bat, both cams will overlay each other. And as far as a referencing point, I'm going to pick this uprise in the big tooth before the gap, measure that, and it's around 92. So we'll pick the same spots to look at on our current vehicle and make sure it's in time. And here is our current vehicle, and again, both cams overlay each other. Pick this same spot, uprising on the big one. Now I'm getting about 91. So I would say that the timing is in fact okay. And I believe the reason why it's throwing the synchronization code is because when it loses the crank sensor signal here and it stays gone, it doesn't know where in time it is because there's no signal to tell it where the crankshaft is. So I believe that code is just being generated because of the loss of the crankshaft sensor signal. And as we verified, it is in time. Now the 100% proper thing to finalize as far as issue with the crankshaft sensor signal is to check power and ground at the same time as the signal as it drops out. If you have both power and ground staying constant, then you know simply it's just going to be a sensor and not a power supply or ground issue. As far as this one, I have had experience with this beforehand on other, actually it was another X3, and it was the crankshaft sensor. So I honestly am just going to go ahead and order a brand new factory sensor and install that, and this should be taken care of as far as that sensor issue. And then obviously we'll go ahead and get a whole new valve cover. Again, these are known for having crankcase breathing issues and related to the basically the crankcase breather valve, which on this vehicle it's made and built into the valve cover assembly. So we'll get a brand new factory unit, replace it, clear everything, reset adaptations, and this customer should be good to go from there on out. So that's pretty much it on this one. If anything more funky arises pertaining with the crankshaft sensor signal issue, I will make sure to pick up the camera, bring you along. But there's not much more. Pretty straightforward, just verifying with the two testing methods, and we should have no more issues. So I'm getting ready to throw out a bunch of trash, but I kind of wanted to just show you about the commonality of the failure. So I've got one valve cover, 2, 3, 4 on 1 week. Basically all failed the same exact way. High crankcase vacuum. Now the reason why is they have these diaphragm valves that are incorporated in there. This one's actually able to be removed and accessed, and it's just a rubber diaphragm. And the problem is when moisture gets in there, it'll ice up in cold weathers and tear up the rubber diaphragm. So I wanted to kind of bring you along on this after replacement situation that I've run into. And I've run into this in the past before with N52 engines and certain DME, I guess, versions. And particularly, I think only in the 3 Series and I guess the X3s. Anytime you do any work related to, basically fueling and trim, that the mixture was thrown off, you want to always reset your adaptations in the DME. But a big problem, and I can't always remember which until I run into a situation, and I'm at times makes me weary of resetting adaptations. So what ends up happening is when you reset the adaptations and you get the vehicle up and running, you'll have a continuous check engine light right after you reset them. And if you go in here and read codes, there's no codes. Obviously we're talking with the DME and nothing but if you look at the other modules on the powertrain, your transmission, it says no message from the engine computer, and then the ABS, and these are present. And the ABS interface with cluster, interface with engine, interface transmission, limp home operation, present. And then the transfer case, no message DSC, and that's present as well. Basically, what happens is when you reset adaptations, it throws the vehicle in this funky mode, and it'll display check engine. You cannot clear it, and if you try to clear these codes, they'll stay present like a hard state. And based on the trouble code numbers on these other modules, there used to be a bulletin where you could pull up information, and I cannot remember which one of those codes would bring it up, but even now I don't know if they've removed that bulletin, but I cannot pull it up. Was trying to show you where it explains how I think the situation when you reset the adaptations, it makes these other modules kind of not see the DME, even though we are able to talk to the DME. So the thing to do, that as to what the bulletin would explain, is basically you would have to go in with the factory tool into one of the special functions and kind of basically do a reset deal in a certain way. Now I've tried to do that in the past with this, and it does not do it. The only thing that I found that does rectify the problem is basically getting in there and performing a programming and coding on the powertrain modules. Once that is done, it brings everything back aligned. Everyone's communicating with everyone and seeing the DME, and then you are able to clear that and clear these. So I am now basically set up with the JBox to do programming, and I do have the maintainer set up and running, so we will back out, go to programming. Okay, so we'll go in the coding, code control unit. I'll actually do this one. So the coding just finished, and I actually just went into the EGS to see what the codes were, which are going to be, I guess, the previous ones, but it's listed as absent. If we back out, we know the ABS also had some. Let's see if these are absent. Okay, so the bottom two are absent, and the top one's still present, but that's looking hopeful. So I will go ahead and complete this by backing out of the coding, and I'll clear every. I'll read all the modules, and then I'll clear all the modules to hopefully get rid of all the non-present but stored in memory faults. Okay, so we've read all the modules. We'll go to the report, and so absent, that's one we knew about, but the others absent. And that's it. That as far as being relevant in the PT. Now I will delete all of those and go from there. Okay, so I cleared all the faults. The only ones that are there for the LED bulbs and stuff like that. But all powertrain codes are now gone, and I just started it after letting it sit for a minute. And no check engine light. So for some reason, again, on these MS, I don't know which MS, I'd have to look, but the N52 DMEs, when you go ahead and clear adaptations, for some reason it takes out the DME from being seen on the other powertrain modules, and a weird erroneous check engine light will pop up and stay on there unless you do I guess the programming coding to align everything and make everyone happy.